Hey, this is Professor Homo. Welcome to Intro to CSS. We're going to do a little CSS lesson for those of you who are not familiar with CSS. Also a review for some of you who are familiar with CSS and may need a little refresher. So we're going to go to W3 Schools. You can click on the home page and you can just go down to Learn CSS, and we're going to start there. Now the CSS home area that they have here doesn't have a whole lot of information, although we are going to work with this sample file here. We're actually going to work with that once we start our first little kind of sandbox exercise. So this will not be part of our EX4 right now. We're just going to kind of play around a little bit with CSS just to get familiar with it. Under Introduction, I'd like you to just kind of read through some of the information they have there. They have some definitions of CSS and a couple bullet points here, not a lot of reading. It even has a kind of a demo area where it shows a sample that's basically the same content, but it uses a couple different style sheets. And you can see what style sheets do. They change the layout, they change the colors, they change the fonts, they change the navigation. Here's style sheet 4, here's no style sheet, and this you're used to seeing from your first EX4 document kind of look like this, where everything has kind of the same spacing. It has space between the H1s, space between the paragraphs, bulleted lists that look like this, basically a Times New Roman font, blue links. We're going to change all that with CSS, and there's different ways to do that. And under How To, I'm going to skip over syntax right now, and under How To, they tell you about the 3 ways to insert CSS, or the 3 ways to utilize CSS. We're primarily going to use an external style sheet because that's the most efficient. It keeps our CSS separate from our HTML in a separate file, and it also allows us to control multiple HTML pages from one CSS document, which is a lot more efficient than having CSS on each HTML page. That means we can update CSS from one document for hundreds of HTML pages if we wanted to. There's also an internal style sheet. We're going to use that in the beginning because it's just kind of convenient, because if I scroll down here and just show you what an internal style sheet looks like, it basically puts our styles in our HTML page in a separate area. We can use style tags. You can see they have style tags here inside the head tag, and I should click on the try it yourself here so we can see the HTML. It puts basically inside your head tag, and you're familiar with our head tag. That's where we put our title and our meta tags. We're going to put style tags inside there, and then we can put multiple styles inside there. Now eventually it's not that efficient because you'd have to have styles linked up for every single HTML page that you have. When we use external style sheets, we'll have one document that controls multiple pages. But for now, this will be a good way to learn, and it'll kind of keep everything in one place. So we're going to kind of use this method when we get started, the internal style sheet. And the other method, if I scroll down here, and it's the one that's not recommended, it's called inline styles. That's where you can actually put a style inside an element. Right inside of an H1 tag, you could style it. Now that's okay, you could do that, and sometimes you have to. If you're using discussion boards, or when I use e-learning, there's no way to use either external or internal style sheets. You have to put a style right inside of an HTML tag. So sometimes that's the only thing you could do, but it's not really recommended. If you had one thing on a page you had to change, you could do this, but it's not going to be something that we're going to use very often. So I'll demonstrate that when we start kind of playing around with our CSS a little bit, but that's called an inline style. So again, there's the 3 ways to do this. There's external, which is probably the most efficient and the most popular. We'll be using that. Internal, which is a good way to learn in the beginning, but then as we get more pages, we'll break out to the external. And inline, which we'll use only occasionally. Now also, I'm going to take a look at the syntax when we write CSS. Now this will change. If we did internal styles, the syntax would change a little bit because we wouldn't have the curly brackets. But for the most part, the way CSS works is you basically target an element like an H1 or a P or a UL or a body or any kind of HTML element or tag on a page, and then you can style that. And you could basically put multiple, they call them declarations. Here's a declaration, color blue, font size 12 point. So that's a declaration. And here, I'll look at one down here. Here's an actual one, and it says P. P is the selector because it's saying all paragraphs, and then here's 2 declarations. And notice they're inside curly brackets. The 2 declarations say color red, which is actually the font, even though it doesn't say font color. Color means the font color. And then text align, it could align its center. So this one's pretty boring when you click on it. That's all it does. So it just takes every paragraph and it centers it and it makes it red. So we're going to be doing a lot more things than that. You could see over here we could change backgrounds, we could put borders, we could do margins and padding, which will describe the difference between them. We can adjust the sizes, we can adjust links, and we could adjust layout. We can float elements side by side. So there's a lot we can do with CSS. So check out the syntax. Make sure you read through this a little bit and you're familiar with the terminology, because in HTML it's called attribute and value, whereas in CSS it's called property and value. And notice that it has basically a property, a colon, and then it has the value, whatever that may be. It could be a color, it could be a value with like sizes, it could be ems, and basically after every declaration there's going to be a semicolon. So it's going to kind of look like this, and you'll get the hang of it once we do it. So we're gonna kind of practice a little bit with one of the sample HTML files right here in W3 Schools. So you'll be able to work with it right here in W3 Schools. You could either save it, you could copy and paste it into brackets, or they even have a way you could save a link, and you could even send me a link if you want. We'll check out all the ways of doing this, but this will be the start of our intro to CSS. Now for the next part, please read over this first, but what we're going to do next is we're going to kind of play around in the sandbox a little bit. Now here's an example of one I already did. This is what we're going to do, is we're going to basically take their sample and kind of turn it into this. Now let me show you the sample we're going to work with. And the sample we're going to work with is actually under CSS Home. We're going to start with this one because there's a body, there's H1, and there's P. And we're going to start with this. And it's going to look like this. It's going to be pretty kind of boring to start. It just gives it a blue background color. It gives this a white color, it centers it, and we're going to kind of turn it into this. We're going to do this with CSS. So we'll get a chance to explore margins and padding and font sizes and changing fonts and font colors, all this kind of stuff here. Font family, font size, padding, margin left, all this kind of stuff. Background color, even a border. We could even put a border on here. We're going to be working with that to kind of practice a little bit. So it's kind of low pressure, and if you've used CSS before, it'll be a little bit of a refresher. So we're going to get started with this next.